They say grief has no timetable, but apparently, my daughter-in-law believed it came with a 24-hour clock. My name is Eleanor. I was 67 the year my son passed. I had buried my husband already. I had buried my parents, but nothing prepared me for the day I lost David. He was my only child, the bridge between me and the cold woman he chose to marry. When that bridge collapsed, the distance between us became a canyon, and in that canyon, I was left standing alone. Before we dive into more family betrayal stories, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. The funeral was on a Monday. The house still smelled of lilies and funeral food when the very next evening Stephanie walked into the room I'd been sleeping in David's old childhood bedroom and delivered her verdict like a judge slamming down the gavel. "This house is in David's name, which means it's mine now. You'll need to pack and leave tomorrow." I thought I'd misheard her. My ears were still ringing with the sound of hymns from the service, my chest still heavy with the words of the eulogy I had somehow managed to read without collapsing. Surely she was speaking out of shock or exhaustion. People grieve differently, I told myself. Some cry, some retreat. Surely she didn't mean what she'd just said. But then she folded her arms, lifted her chin, and repeated it with a finality that chilled me. "Tomorrow evening, Eleanor. That's enough time for you to get your things together. Have you ever felt your entire life shrink to the size of a suitcase? That's what happened to me in that moment." I looked around the bedroom at the framed photo of David in his cap and gown, at the stack of sympathy cards on the dresser, at the quilt I had stitched by hand the year he graduated college. In less than 24 hours, all of it would be packed, reduced to whatever could fit in the trunk of my car. I tried to reason with her. "Stephanie, I understand you're grieving, we both are, but surely we can." She cut me off with a wave of her manicured hand. "No, I need my privacy. It's not working anymore, you being here. David's gone. You need to accept that. Family betrayal. That's what it was. Not just grief, not just tension between in-laws betrayal. Because this wasn't a stranger tossing me out. It was the woman who had once called me mom, who had sat at my table and eaten my Christmas pies, who had leaned on me when David was traveling for work. And now, with him gone, she dropped the mask and showed me exactly how she felt. I was an inconvenience, a burden to be swept out like yesterday's ashes. The next morning, I folded clothes with trembling hands. I wrapped up the few photographs she hadn't already removed from the shelves. 4 suitcases, 2 cardboard boxes. 67 years of living, of giving, of mothering compressed to what could fit in the back seat of a sedan. Each trip down the stairs felt like walking away from the only life I knew. At 6 o'clock sharp, she appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "Time's up," she said. Not a hint of compassion, not even the courtesy of pretending to feel guilty. I loaded the last box, shut the trunk, and for a long moment just stood in the driveway. That house had been filled with David's laughter, with Sunday dinners, with memories I thought were mine to share. Now it was just Stephanie's prize. She watched from the porch, her silhouette framed in the doorway like a guard making sure I really left. I rolled down the window and tried one last time to reach the shred of humanity I hoped was still inside her. "Will you at least tell me if there's going to be a formal reading of David's will?" I asked quietly. Her answer was a dagger. "Why would he leave you anything? You're not his wife, and it's not like you ever contributed financially to this household." I almost laughed at the irony. I had sold my own home to give them $40,000 for their down payment. That money was the reason they'd been able to buy the house in the first place. But in Stephanie's mind, I was just extra baggage. Family betrayal. That phrase kept echoing in my mind as I drove away the taillights, catching her still standing in the driveway, arms crossed, satisfied she had won. I checked into a Hampton Inn off Route 9. The room smelled of bleach and broken dreams. I sat on the polyester bedspread staring at the mirror above the dresser. Who was that woman looking back? A widow, now childless, now homeless, apparently worthless in the eyes of the only family I had left. And yet, here's the part that might surprise you. Under the grief beneath the humiliation, something else began to stir. Not despair, though that was there too. Something sharper. Anticipation. Because I had raised David. I knew his heart. I knew the kind of man he was. And a voice inside me whispered, "He wouldn't have left you with nothing. He wouldn't have let her have the last word. Stephanie thought she had discarded me. What she didn't realize was that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people reveal exactly who they are, because sooner or later, karma has a way of showing up right on time. If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me. Grief is a thief. It doesn't knock politely. It barges in when you least expect it, stripping you of sleep, of peace, of certainty. For me, it came at exactly 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. The phone rang shrill and insistent in the darkness of my borrowed room. My hands fumbled for the receiver, heart already pounding with that primal fear every parent knows, the fear of late-night calls. "Mom." David's voice was ragged, breathless, as though each syllable cost him effort. "My chest. I can't." Then silence. The line went dead. I don't remember pulling on my coat. Don't remember grabbing the car keys. One moment I was in bed, the next I was speeding down Route 7, every red light a personal enemy. By the time I reached the hospital, the sterile hallway felt like a courtroom already pronouncing sentence. A doctor young enough to be my grandson met me at the ER doors. He didn't mince words. Massive heart attack. Nothing we could do. His tone was clinical, detached, the way people speak when they're used to delivering bad news. But there's no soft way to tell a mother her child is gone. David, my healthy, vibrant 45-year-old son, gone. My knees buckled, and I clutched the counter for balance. Beside me, Stephanie stood in her designer coat, face a mask of practiced grief. But behind the shock, I thought I saw something else, a flicker of relief quickly buried. I told myself I was imagining things. Grief does that. It distorts it, invents. Surely no woman could feel relief in the moment her husband died. I whispered the only words I could manage. "What happens now?" Stephanie's shoulders straightened, and for the first time, the cracks in her composure showed. "Now," she said, voice flat as marble, "we deal with reality. David's gone. I have decisions to make." A chill rippled through me. Not we mourn, not we support each other, but I have decisions to make. Family betrayal doesn't always come as a scream. Sometimes it comes as a whisper in a fluorescent hallway at 4 a.m. The next 3 days blurred into a fog of funeral arrangements. I offered to help with expenses after all. David had been my only child, but Stephanie waved me off with clipped efficiency. I'm his wife. I know what he would have wanted. So I retreated into the only role left to me. I wrote his eulogy called "Relatives Tried to Stitch Together Meaning in the Midst of Chaos." But every time I passed Stephanie in the house, I felt the distance widening. The polite fiction we had lived by her brittle smiles at Christmas dinners, her obligatory hugs on birthdays, was unraveling thread by thread. The night before the funeral, I sat alone in David's old room. I stared at the dresser lined with photos, his graduation, his wedding last Christmas when he held his nephew. But where were the photos of David and me? The trips we took, the birthdays we celebrated? One by one, I realized they had been quietly removed, erased. The soft knock at the door made me jump. Stephanie stood there, no longer even pretending to wear the mask of civility. "We need to talk," she said. Her timing was cruel. The funeral the next day was beautiful flowers, fragrant hymns soaring, every detail orchestrated with precision. And yet, as I stood in the receiving line accepting hugs from neighbors and condolences from cousins, I overheard her voice from behind the floral arrangements. "The life insurance alone will cover the mortgage for 2 years," she whispered to her sister. "And without the extra expenses." Extra expenses. That was me. Her sister asked, "But what about Eleanor? Where will she go?" Stephanie's laugh was sharp enough to slice. "Not my problem. She can figure it out like any other adult." The words hit harder than the funeral itself. Because funerals end, but cruelty lingers. I kept my composure, kept shaking hands, kept saying thank you. But inside something was breaking, not just my heart, but my trust. My son had barely been laid to rest, and already the woman he married was calculating her freedom, her finances, her future, without me. Later, as the guests left and the house emptied, Stephanie appeared at my elbow, all sweetness for the public eye. "Eleanor, could you help me in the kitchen? There are some things we need to discuss." The trap was set. I followed her through the swinging door, the sound of murmured goodbyes fading behind me. And that, my friends, is where betrayal stops being subtle and starts being spoken out loud. Because what she told me in that kitchen, her ultimatum, her cold certainty, would change everything. It was the moment I realized that grief had taken my son, but betrayal was about to take my home. The kitchen smelled like lemon cleaner, and lilies, the sharp and the sweet of a day that had asked too much of everyone. Trays of untouched sandwiches sweated beneath plastic wrap. The dishwasher hummed a steady mechanical heart, doing the one task a human heart could not. Stephanie shut the door with her heel set 2 glasses on the island and didn't offer me water. "We need to talk," she said, as if the words themselves were a kindness. I stood with my palms flat on the cool granite, watching the halo of her wedding ring flash beneath the ceiling light. I remembered the day David slid that ring onto her finger, his hands shaking, his eyes lit with hope. Hope is a generous thing. It lends character the benefit of the doubt, and it lends time to people who haven't earned it. "I'm going to be direct," she continued. The practiced softness slipped. What remained was steel. "This house is in David's name, which means it's mine now. I need time and space to grieve without complications." "Complications," I repeated, tasting the word. "You mean me." She didn't blink. "You living here. It isn't working anymore." Behind her, the sink dripped in a lazy metronome. I folded my hands to stop their trembling. "Stephanie, I understand we're both raw tonight. Grief makes people say things. But we can figure out a timeline that tomorrow evening," she said cleanly, like cutting a thread. 6 o'clock. There are sentences that don't land all at once. They circle you, looking for a soft place to strike. I thought of the guest coat still hanging by the door, the casserole dishes borrowed from neighbors, the sympathy cards stacked like tiny little gravestones on the dining table. "Tomorrow," I heard myself say. "You want me gone in 24 hours? I need my privacy," she said, and lifted a shoulder in a shrug so small it stung. "David's gone, Eleanor. You need to accept that." The dishwasher clicked to a new cycle. A faint rush of water covered the sound of my breath catching. "I do accept that he's gone," I said quietly. "I don't accept rewriting the last 2 years like I never existed. I sold my home to help you buy this one, $40,000, so you two could have a start. I have been cooking, cleaning, keeping the lights on when he traveled. I've tried." She cut the air with one manicured hand. "No one asked you to martyr yourself. The $40,000 was a gift. Families help each other. That's what you always said, right? Family betrayal." The words rose unbidden, a caption under the scene. Not a stranger, not a landlord family. And still she could say gift, like I'd handed over a spare umbrella, not the roof over my own head. "If it makes you feel better," she added, voice suddenly syrupy, "we can call it a contribution, but you're not on the deed, you're not on the mortgage, you have no claim." The legal words fitted neatly in her mouth, as if she'd practiced them. I thought of the overheard whisper behind the funeral flowers, "The life insurance will cover the mortgage for 2 years, and without the extra expenses." I thought of her sister asking where I would go, and Stephanie laughing. "Not my problem." In the fluorescent light of that tidy kitchen, the mask finished slipping. There she was at last, the woman David had bridged for years. And with the bridge gone, the canyon showed. "What about a week?" I tried once more. "There are logistics, storage, a short-term rental." "Tomorrow," she said again, slower this time, like talking to someone hard of hearing. "It's for the best. Prolonging things makes it worse." For whom? For everyone, she said, but her eyes said for me. I took in the room so I'd remember it like it truly was not the curated version she offered to guests. The lemon loops where she'd wiped the counters 3 times today to keep busy. The smudge of mascara near the light switch. The good china peeking out from the glass front cabinet plates that would be arranged perfectly for sympathy and perfectly for celebration, because presentation was the only thing she could control. "What happens to the things that are mine?" I asked. "You'll pack them," she said, as if teaching a child a simple task. "I'll help you bring them down. We can be civil." Civil. The smallest word for the largest wound. "What about David's things?" I asked. The photographs in the den, the box of his school programs. There's no reason for you to... She paused, recalibrated. I'll sort through them. Later. I wondered how much later it would take for my face to vanish from the frames altogether. I thought of the dresser upstairs, already scrubbed of the photos of just the two of us. Erased is a quieter verb than taken. It does its work in the night. She checked the clock. It's been a long day, she said. You should rest. I'll expect you downstairs around 9 in the morning. I'll be tied up, but Marcus can stop by after lunch. Marcus, I repeated, to help carry the boxes. To make sure everything goes smoothly, she said. There it was not just speed, but supervision. I wanted to say 100 things about mercy, about the difference between privacy and cruelty, about what David would think if he were standing here listening to the way she clipped our lives into bullet points. But grief and dignity are old friends, and they both told me to choose my words like I might need them again. Thank you for telling me your plan, I said, and heard the old schoolteacher in my voice. I'll be ready. She nodded once satisfied. Good night, Eleanor. I opened the kitchen door, and the murmur of the reception floated in, cousins saying their last. I'm so sorry, neighbors retrieving their dishes. The front door breathing in and out on a hinge that needed oil. For a strange, suspended second, I looked back. Stephanie was already stacking the untouched sandwiches, efficient, composed alone in her spotless, humming kingdom. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of the bed that had been my harbor and let my hands settle. The eulogy lay on the nightstand, creased where my fingers had clutched it at the church. I traced David's name with my thumb until the letters blurred. Then I pulled out the suitcase and opened the closet. There is a kind of quiet that feels like the edge of a map. Past this point, your old knowledge is unreliable. Past this point, you are guessing at the terrain. I chose 3 dresses, 2 cardigans, the quilt I'd stitched the spring he graduated. I tucked in the photo of us at the county fair, the one she hadn't found. I tucked in a prayer. Tomorrow at 6, she would stand in the doorway and announce that time was up. I knew that now, but I also knew something she did not, Mercy, has a long memory, and so does truth. The dishwasher thrummed through the wall like a distant drumbeat counting down. And somewhere beneath the grief rising to my throat, something steadier answered back. If she thought this was the last word, she didn't know my son, nor his mother. There's a strange stillness the morning after a funeral. The casseroles are still in the fridge, the flowers already beginning to sag, and yet the house feels emptied of its purpose. Death has done its work, and the living are left with the paperwork. I woke early more out of habit than need. At my age, sleep comes in fragments anyway. The suitcase lay open on the floor, half filled with the bones of a life folded, sweaters, packets of old letters, a photograph or 2. I had been careful not to pack too loudly. Part of me still expected Stephanie to change her mind, to knock on the door with red eyes and say, "Stay as long as you need, Eleanor. We'll figure this out together." That knock never came. By mid-morning, the house had the sound of a hive without a queen, neighbors returning. Borrowed dishes, the front door opening and closing, muffled voices in the hall. I kept to my room. It was safer there, away from the eyes of people who might wonder why the grieving mother was also folding laundry into cardboard boxes. At noon, I carried the first suitcase down the stairs. Stephanie was already waiting at the bottom, her arms folded. "Let me help," she said, but it didn't sound like help. It sounded like surveillance. We made 3 trips together, her heels clicking on the hardwood with each descent. When the last box was loaded into the trunk, she leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed like a bailiff, making sure the courtroom cleared out. "I know you're angry," I said finally. My voice sounded small, but steady. I wish I knew what I'd done wrong so I could fix it. Her expression didn't soften. "You didn't do anything wrong, Eleanor. You just exist in my space. David felt sorry for you. I don't. It was honesty, I'll give her that. Brutal, clean honesty, sharper than all the polite smiles we'd worn for years." "Where exactly do you expect me to go?" I asked. "You're a grown woman," she said with a shrug. "You'll figure something out. Family betrayal." I thought it again like an unwanted prayer. This was what betrayal looked like. Not yelling, not slammed doors, but the casual cruelty of someone who believed they'd already won. At 6 o'clock sharp, she appeared in my doorway, arms crossed, voice brisk. "Time's up." I zipped the last suitcase, ran my hand once over the bare dresser, and walked out. It struck me how quickly a room forgets you when your things are gone. 2 years of my life vanished into the neutral beige of a guest room. No trace I had ever been there. We carried the boxes together in silence. The air outside was sharp-smelling of pine and car exhaust. The sun was setting, painting the driveway gold, but Stephanie's shadow stretched long and thin across the pavement like a guardrail I couldn't cross. When the last box was in the car, I turned back, hoping for something human, perhaps even a stiff nod, some acknowledgement of what had just happened. Instead, she said, "Drive safe," as if we were casual acquaintances, parting after coffee. The words clanged inside me. Drive safe. Safe to where I slid behind the wheel, started the engine, and rolled down the window. "Will you at least tell me if there's going to be a formal reading of David's will?" Her brow furrowed. "Why would he leave you anything? You're not his wife. And it's not like you ever contributed financially to our household." That made me laugh bitter and hollow. $40,000 said otherwise. The down payment that bought this very driveway had come from me. But I realized then that she had convinced herself it was a gift, and you can't argue someone out of the lies they tell to sleep at night. So I said nothing. I drove away without looking back. In the rearview mirror, she stood at the edge of the driveway, arms still folded, the silhouette of someone who believed she'd just ended a chapter. The Hampton Inn was only 10 miles away, but the distance felt biblical. I checked in, carried my suitcases up to a room that smelled of bleach and old air conditioning, and sat on the stiff bedspread. The mirror above the dresser caught me in its frame, but I hardly recognized the woman staring back. A widow, childless, homeless. 67 years reduced to a handful of suitcases and 2 cardboard boxes. And yet, beneath the exhaustion, a pulse of something unexpected beat inside me. Not despair, though that was heavy enough, but anticipation. Stephanie thought she had erased me, had pushed me neatly off the page. But I knew my son. I knew David. He was the kind of man who noticed, who planned, who never left a task unfinished. If he had loved me enough to call me at 3:17 a.m. with his last breath, then he had loved me enough to leave some corner of his life intact for me. The betrayal was hers, yes, but the last word that would belong to him, and sooner than she thought. The Hampton Inn had the kind of silence that didn't comfort, only reminded you that no one was coming. The hum of the air conditioner, the faint buzz of traffic on Route 9, those were my companions. I had unpacked just enough to make the room look less like a crime scene, folding sweaters into the drawers, lining my shoes in neat rows, like soldiers waiting for orders. But the mirror above the dresser kept betraying me. Each time I caught my reflection, I saw someone smaller than I remembered. A widow, a mother without a son, a woman whose family had decided her presence was an extra expense. I wondered if this was how invisibility began, not suddenly, but in increments. One day you're setting the dinner table, the next day, your luggage on the curb. I tried to be practical. I opened my laptop and began searching rental listings, one-bedroom apartments, senior communities, anything within the radius of what my pension and Social Security could manage. My savings after a week at this hotel and a deposit on a new place would look thinner than I liked. Still, I told myself I would survive. I had survived worse. Then came the phone call. It was exactly 2 weeks after the funeral. I was sitting at the little laminate desk, circling prices in the classifieds, when my cell phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. For a moment, I hesitated, scams, telemarketers, but something nudged me to answer. "Mrs. Fairfield." The voice was deep professional. "This is James Morrison from Morrison & Associates. I handled your son's legal affairs." I straightened instinctively as though posture could prepare me for news. "Yes, Mr. Morrison. I remember you from David and Stephanie's closing. I'm calling to inform you that the probate process is complete, and there will be a formal reading of David's will next Tuesday at 2 p.m. in my office. Your presence is required. Required." The word slammed into me with more force than Stephanie's eviction notice. Required meant I wasn't invisible. Required meant David had thought of me, had written my name in ink where no one could erase it. I think there must be some confusion," I stammered. Stephanie made it clear that everything Mrs. Fairfield Mr. Morrison interrupted gently. I can only tell you what David's will specifies, and it specifically names you as a beneficiary. A pause stretched between us, filled with the hum of the air conditioner and the racing of my heart. "I'll see you next Tuesday at 2, he concluded. When the line went dead, I sat holding the phone as if it might deliver more words if I squeezed hard enough. Beneficiary. David had left me something. What I didn't know. Perhaps a keepsake, a watch, a set of photo albums, maybe just a token, a gesture to say, "I see you, Mom." I didn't forget. But whatever it was, Stephanie wasn't expecting it. That I realized was its own kind of justice. The next few days, I lived in a fog of equal parts dread and hope. I toured a senior living community with tidy gardens and pastel curtains. I looked at a cramped one-bedroom with stained carpet, but a kind landlord. Every option reminded me of how far I'd fallen from the house where I'd once cooked Sunday dinners. And yet beneath the fear anticipation hummed steady. On Tuesday, I arrived at the law office 15 minutes early. The parking lot was quiet, the late spring sun bouncing off polished car hoods. I sat in my car, rehearsing how to behave gracious, calm, not gloating no matter what David had left me. Then the silver BMW pulled in. Stephanie stepped out in a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly budget, her heels clicking against the pavement. She wasn't alone. A tall man in an expensive suit trailed her eyes glued to his phone. Marcus, her brother. Of course. She would want backup, someone to take notes, someone to glare on her behalf. When I walked into the reception area, Stephanie's face darkened. "What is she doing here?" she demanded, voice sharp enough to slice glass. The receptionist, unbothered, replied, "Mrs. Fairfield is here for the will reading." "Which Mrs. Fairfield?" Stephanie shot back loud enough to make the young woman's cheeks pink. "Both of you, apparently." Marcus leaned down and whispered something in Stephanie's ear. She stiffened, then sat across the room from me, legs crossed, jaw tight. She didn't look at me again. At 2:00 sharp, Mr. Morrison appeared. Silver-haired, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of man who still believed law was about fairness. He ushered us into his office, and we took our seats around the mahogany desk. "I know this is a difficult time," he began, but David was very specific about his wishes. "I'll read the will in its entirety, and then we can discuss any questions." Stephanie leaned forward eagerly, Marcus poised with a legal pad. I folded my hands and waited, my pulse drumming in my ears. The first section went exactly as I expected: the house, the cars, the retirement accounts, the life insurance, all to Stephanie. She nodded after each item, her lips curving in satisfaction. And then Mr. Morrison's tone shifted. There is, however, one final provision that David added just 3 months ago. The room changed temperature. Stephanie stopped nodding, Marcus stopped writing, and I found myself holding my breath. Mr. Morrison cleared his throat. "To my mother, Eleanor Fairfield. I leave the contents of safe deposit box E3D7 at First National Bank, along with all associated documentation and account information contained therein." Stephanie's voice cracked like a whip. What safe deposit box David never mentioned, but I barely heard her. My son had left me something real, not a trinket, not a photograph, a safe deposit box. Whatever was inside would change everything. If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me. The air in Mr. Morrison's office was heavy with polish and paper, mahogany desk, leather-bound books, the faint smell of coffee long gone cold. It felt like a room built for truths you didn't want to hear. Stephanie perched on the edge of her chair, black dress, perfectly tailored pearls winking at her throat. Marcus, her brother, flipped open a legal pad and poised his pen, the picture of professional readiness. I sat quietly, palms flat on my lap, as if stillness alone could steady the trembling inside me. Mr. Morrison adjusted his glasses. As I said, David's will is very specific. The first section passes the residence vehicle's retirement accounts, and life insurance proceeds to his wife, Mrs. Stephanie Fairfield. Stephanie nodded with practiced composure, but the slight upturn of her lips betrayed her satisfaction. She wanted me to see it, that she had won, that she was legitimate, that I was nothing more than a spectator. Then Mr. Morrison's voice changed. A small clearing of his throat, the deliberate tone of a man reaching the part that matters most. There is, however, one final provision added 3 months ago. The air shifted. Stephanie stopped nodding. Marcus's pen froze mid-scratch. I could hear the faint tick of the wall clock louder now, as if marking the seconds before impact. Mr. Morrison read, "To my mother, Eleanor Fairfield, who provided the down payment for our home and never once demanded repayment. I leave the contents of safe deposit box E3D7 at First National Bank, along with all associated documentation and account information therein." My breath caught. Stephanie's face went crimson. Safe deposit box, David never mentioned any safe deposit box to me. That's because he didn't want you to know, I thought. Mr. Morrison remained calm. He maintained it privately. He was very clear that the contents were to go to his mother alone. Marcus leaned forward. "What's in the box?" "I have no idea," Mr. Morrison admitted. "My duty is only to convey the provision. The bank will grant Mrs. Fairfield access upon presentation of the death certificate and this key." He slid a small sealed envelope across the desk. It felt heavier than it looked when I picked it up, as if all my son's love and foresight had been condensed into that single motion. Stephanie lunged half out of her chair. "This is ridiculous. If there's anything of value in that box, it's part of the estate. It should come to me." "You are, of course, free to contest," Mr. Morrison said mildly, "but I can assure you the provision is airtight. David was fully competent when he amended the will. I personally witnessed the signature. When exactly did he add this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "February 15th, Mr. Morrison replied, "the day after Valentine's Day." I remembered that dinner, Stephanie complaining about the neighbor's dog, David, unusually quiet, pushing food around his plate. That must have been the week he'd decided he needed to protect me. Stephanie stood abruptly. "We'll file a challenge first thing tomorrow. Come on, Marcus." "Before you go," Mr. Morrison interjected, pulling out another envelope. David left additional instructions for his mother. "Mrs. Fairfield, this contains the bank documents and his personal key. The bank will need 3 business days to process the paperwork. After that, the contents are yours to view privately." Stephanie's eyes locked on the envelope in my hands like a hawk tracking prey. "I'm coming with you to the bank." "I'm afraid that isn't possible," Mr. Morrison said firmly. "Access is restricted to Mrs. Fairfield only. Bank policy." "This is insane," she snapped. "How do we even know there's anything in there? It could be junk. Sentimental garbage." I rose slowly, clutching the envelope. "Then I suppose we'll find out, won't we?" In the parking lot afterward, she cornered me by my car, her perfume sharp in the afternoon heat. "Eleanor, let's be reasonable. Whatever's in that box, we should share it. David would want his wife to benefit." For the first time since David's death, I almost smiled. "Funny. You made it very clear you didn't believe he'd leave me anything. Now suddenly you're interested in sharing. I'm saying we can make this easier on both of us." "You're saying whatever you think might get you access to that box," I corrected. Her mask cracked, then cold calculation flooding through. "Don't forget you're homeless. You need my goodwill more than I need yours." I opened my car door, turned back just long enough to meet her eyes. "Actually, Stephanie, I don't think I need anything from you at all." Her face twisted, half fury, half panic. I drove away with the envelope on the seat beside me, the key inside burning like a brand. For the first time in weeks, I felt something stirring beneath the grief. Not triumph, not yet, but certainty. David had planned this. He had seen her true colors long before I had, and he had left me the one thing she couldn't touch: the truth. In 3 business days, I would open that box, and whatever waited inside would be mine, not just the contents, but the knowledge that my son had never stopped protecting me. The next day at noon sharp, I parked in front of what used to feel like my home. Stephanie's silver BMW gleamed in the driveway, the roses I had planted 2 summers ago blooming recklessly along the fence as if mocking me. I carried a small gift bag in my hand, a prop really, and wore my calmest face. Stephanie opened the door before I could knock, dressed in a flowing white sundress that probably cost more than a month of my hotel stay. Her smile was wide-teeth perfect, but her eyes darted immediately to the envelope I carried. "Eleanor, I'm so glad you came," she gushed. "I made your favorite chicken salad." Funny, I thought, how she suddenly remembers my favorites when she wants something. The dining room was set like a stage. Fresh flowers, polished wedding china glasses filled with iced tea, beating condensation in the warm noon light. She had rehearsed this moment, hoping to dazzle me into compliance. We sat. She poured tea, chattered about the weather, about neighbors sending condolences, about how grief takes many forms. I let her talk, spooning salad onto my plate, nodding occasionally. My silence unsettled her. Finally, she leaned forward, dropping the performance. "I've been thinking about the safety deposit box, about what David left you. Don't you think it would make sense for us to pool resources, combine everything he left behind, my inheritance, your documents? We could invest together. I know excellent advisors." There it was. The pitch. I sipped my tea slowly, watching the ice cubes swirl. "That's thoughtful, Stephanie. But tell me, what makes you think there was anything valuable in the box?" Her smile faltered. "Well, David was private about finances, but he wouldn't have gone through the trouble if it wasn't important." "Private," I repeated. "Interesting word choice." A flicker of unease crossed her face. "Eleanor, we're family. We should stick together. David would want that. Family betrayal." The phrase rang in my head like a bell. She had thrown me out 24 hours after burying her husband, yet now she wanted to preach family. I set down my fork and looked her straight in the eyes. "Actually, Stephanie, I think David told you exactly as much as he thought you needed to know." The mask slipped just slightly, her eyes narrowing. "What did you find in the box, Eleanor?" I reached into the gift bag. "I brought you something." She brightened, tearing away the paper to reveal a framed photo of David at his college graduation. For a moment, her face softened. "Oh, Eleanor, this is lovely. Thank you. I thought you should have it," I said evenly. "After all, you were such a devoted wife." Her head snapped up, the emphasis not lost on her. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing at all. Just appreciating how well you took care of him." The room chilled. Her sweet facade melted into irritation. "Stop being cryptic. Just tell me what was in that box." I smiled, pulled out my phone and swiped to the folder David had left. Documents mostly. Bank records, investment accounts, and quite a few text messages. Her face blanched. Text. Messages. I tilted the phone toward her. "Here's one from 6 months ago. To your sister. God, I can't wait until that old bat moves out. Then we can turn her room into the gym I've been wanting." "Recognize it." She lunged for the phone, but I pulled it back. "There are dozens more," I said calmly. "David was meticulous. He saved everything." "Stop," she whispered, her perfect facade cracking. "And here," I continued, "is an email where you laughed about how gullible I was, how easy it was to make me feel like a burden while you planned to kick me out after David's death." Her knuckles whitened on the edge of the table. He had no right to save private messages. Actually, he had every right. It was his house, and you were discussing his mother. Her breath came, shallow eyes darting. "What do you want?" "Eleanor, an apology." "Fine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I hurt your feelings. Now, can we discuss the money responsibly?" I leaned back. "This isn't about money, Stephanie. It's about truth. You threw me out like garbage, told me David felt sorry for me, said I contributed nothing. But David saw everything. And he protected me because he knew that once he was gone, you'd show your true colors." She shook her head furiously. "You can't prove anything. None of that would hold up in court." I laughed softly. "Court? Oh no, sweetie. I'm not taking you to court. I don't need to." Her face went pale. "Then why are you doing this? Because you thought I had nothing. You thought you'd won. But David made sure I would never be at your mercy. That's the difference between us. You inherit houses and cars, but I inherited the truth, and the truth doesn't fade." The silence stretched thick and unbearable. She slumped back in her chair, her mask gone completely. Her expensive dress, her perfect makeup, it all looked like armor on a defeated soldier. I stood slinging my purse over my shoulder. "Thank you for lunch. The chicken salad was lovely." "Wait!" she called after me, desperation bleeding into her voice. "We can work this out. Please, Eleanor, let's talk." I paused in the doorway. "There's nothing left to work out, Stephanie. You've already said everything I needed to hear, both in person and in writing." And with that, I walked out into the afternoon sun, leaving her surrounded by wedding china and wilted flowers. For the first time since David's death, I felt taller, stronger, not because I had humiliated her, but because I had finally remembered who I was, his mother, the one person she could never erase. I thought leaving Stephanie in that dining room would end things. I imagined she would lick her wounds in private retreat into the comfort of her house and her $500,000 inheritance. But people like Stephanie rarely accept defeat quietly. They scramble, they grasp, they circle back with new masks when the old ones fall away. The first phone call came the very next morning. Eleanor. Her voice was tight, no longer sugary. I may have overreacted. Yesterday, we both said things we didn't mean. I let the silence stretch. Look, I know you have control of those accounts now, she pressed on. $185,000 is significant. I don't think David would want us fighting. Maybe we can put aside our differences, combine resources. I can introduce you to my financial advisor. He's excellent with investments. No, thank you, I cut in my voice even. I'll manage on my own. A sharp exhale crackled through the line. You're making a mistake. People could take advantage of you. At your age, at my age, I said firmly, I know the difference between help and control. Click. I ended the call before she could spin another web, but she didn't stop. Over the next few days, she sent text messages dripping with contradictions. One morning, we're family. We should support each other. That evening, don't forget you'd be nothing without David's generosity. Another time, if you share, I'll make sure you're comfortable. Family betrayal wears many masks, but desperation is the ugliest one. I saved every message. David had taught me that much. Documentation is power. Meanwhile, I began sketching the outlines of a new life. I visited an apartment complex not far from the river, a modest place, but bright with cheerful curtains and a small balcony, perfect for morning coffee. The rent was reasonable, and with my pension plus the investment accounts, I could manage it comfortably. For the first time in weeks, I let myself imagine home without feeling the sting of exile. I pictured hanging David's graduation photo in the hallway, unfolding the quilt I had stitched years ago, planting pots of lavender along the balcony rail. At night in the sterile Hampton Inn room, I would spread David's letter across my lap and reread the final lines. Build a life where no one can make you feel unwanted again. The words became a kind of anthem, a shield against the echoes of Stephanie's cruelty. Still she tried. One evening, as I returned from a grocery run, a familiar car idled outside the hotel entrance. Stephanie stepped out, her hair perfectly styled, her smile brittle. Eleanor, she called, waving, as though we were casual friends meeting by chance. We need to talk. I stiffened. There's nothing left to discuss. She walked closer, lowering her voice. Please, I can't lose everything. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. The mortgage, the bills, the expectations. You inherited the house free and clear, I reminded her. You received life insurance and retirement accounts. You are not destitute, Stephanie. You're simply greedy. Her face twisted. Don't you dare judge me. You think you're some saint because you squirreled away $40,000? That was nothing compared to what David and I built. What David built, I corrected softly, and what he chose to protect from you. Her shoulders sagged, then a moment of unvarnished desperation breaking through. Fine, keep your precious accounts, but at least let me have copies of the documentation. Marcus says what I challenged. Her eyes flickered. Nothing. Forget it. I shook my head slowly. No, Stephanie. You don't get to rewrite the story. Not this time. I walked past her groceries in hand, leaving her standing under the glow of the hotel awning, a woman who had finally discovered that manipulation only works on those willing to be manipulated. Back in my room, I set the bags down and laughed an unexpected, almost giddy laugh. For the first time in months, I felt the scales tipping in my favor. Not because of the money, though, that gave me security, not because of the evidence, though, that gave me power, but because I had chosen myself. I brewed a cup of tea and sat by the window watching the traffic hum along Route 9. Tomorrow, I would sign the lease on the little apartment with the balcony. Tomorrow, I would start moving the pieces of my life into place, not as someone's burden, but as a woman charting her own course. Stephanie could claw, threaten, beg, or bargain. It didn't matter anymore. My future was no longer hers to decide. David had made sure of that. The keys to my new apartment jingled in my palm like a song. Small, silver, ordinary, and yet to me they were freedom. The complex wasn't grand beige siding, neat shrubs, a line of identical balconies like teeth in a smile. But when the manager opened the door and I stepped inside, I felt the breath of possibility. The space was bright sunlight falling across the modest living room, and a small balcony stretched beyond sliding glass doors. Enough for 2 chairs and pots of lavender. Enough for a beginning. I walked through, slowly trailing my hand across the blank walls. Here I would not be told I was in the way. Here I would not be reduced to an extra expense. Every corner whispered invitation, not rejection. The movers brought my suitcases and boxes, so few really for a life of 67 years. I unpacked with deliberate care. The quilt I had stitched for David's college years draped across the bed. His graduation photo hung by the door. The first thing I'd see each morning, the last each night. A handful of books filled one shelf, and in the kitchen I set out 2 mugs, though I lived alone. By evening, the apartment looked less like a stranger's shell and more like mine. I brewed tea, carried it to the balcony, and sat listening to the faint hum of traffic below. The air smelled faintly of jasmine from a neighbor's plant, and the sky blushed pink before surrendering to twilight. For the first time since David's death, I felt still. Not happy, not yet, but still. My phone buzzed. Stephanie, of course. Her message read, "I heard you moved. Congratulations. But you don't have to struggle alone. We could work something out." I almost laughed. Struggle. I looked around at my little apartment paid for with the accounts David had left with my pension, with my own careful planning. There was nothing grand about it, but it was mine, not hers. I set the phone aside without replying. Over the next week, I built a rhythm. Mornings with coffee on the balcony. Afternoons unpacking, arranging, making the space echo-less. Evenings walking the quiet neighborhood, greeting neighbors who didn't know my story, who smiled without judgment. Each small ritual stitched me back into the fabric of life. But Stephanie didn't stop. She left voicemails dripping with false humility. "Eleanor, I think we got off on the wrong foot. We're family, we should be allies, not enemies." She sent texts pretending concern. "At your age, it's risky to handle finances alone. I could help protect what David left you." And when that failed, the tone shifted. "You can't keep this up forever. You'll regret shutting me out. Family betrayal has many chapters, I realized. The cruelty of eviction was only the beginning. Now came the bargaining, the desperation, the scrambling to claw back what she thought was hers. But I didn't bend. I saved her messages in a neat folder on my phone. Documentation. David had taught me well. Instead, I poured my energy into the life he had wanted me to build. I planted lavender in pots on the balcony, their fragrance drifting into the living room. I joined the community center down the street, signing up for an art class filled with women my age who laughed loudly and painted boldly. I filled the quiet with something of my own making, not the echoes of Stephanie's demands. One afternoon, as I painted a clumsy sunflower, I caught myself smiling. Not because my brushstrokes were skillful, they weren't, but because I was surrounded by people who saw me not as a burden, but as a participant. That simple recognition was worth more than any inheritance. Still, the past lingered. At night, I reread David's letter, tracing his words with my fingertips. Build a life where no one can make you feel unwanted again. Each time the sentence felt less like instruction and more like blessing. Stephanie might rage, might bargain, might even plot. But here, in this small apartment with my lavender and my quilt and my photo of David, I had already won. Not against her, but against despair. For the first time in months, when I lay down at night, I didn't dream of eviction or confrontation. I dreamed of a garden of laughter, of mornings filled with light. And that, I realized, was the truest inheritance of all. It was a Wednesday evening when the envelope arrived, slid under my apartment door. Thick paper, Marcus's law firm embossed in the corner. I didn't need to open it to know who had orchestrated this. Inside legal jargon, veiled threats. Stephanie was considering action to contest David's will to claim the accounts he had left in my name. Marcus's signature sprawled at the bottom, a reminder that she had allies or at least someone willing to lend his letterhead. For a moment, the old panic surged. Eviction notices packed boxes, that cold kitchen replayed in my mind. But then I looked around my balcony, lavender glowing in the sunset, David's photo on the wall, the quilt across my bed. This was my life now, chosen not granted. She couldn't take it from me. I called Mr. Morrison the next morning. His calm voice steadied me. "Don't worry, Mrs. Fairfield. The accounts are airtight. David was meticulous. Stephanie can bluster, but she has no legal ground. This is theater, nothing more." Theater. That word rang true. Stephanie had always been about performance, the perfect widow at the funeral, the generous hostess with her chicken salad, now the victim grasping at papers to mask her fear. That evening my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Marcus's letterhead, but Stephanie herself. Her voice was ragged, stripped of all sweetness. "Eleanor, you can't keep this up. I won't let you. You think you've won, but you're old, you're alone. You'll need me sooner or later." I listened, let the venom spill. Then I answered quietly, "No, Stephanie. I needed David, and he gave me what you never could: protection, dignity, love. I don't need you, not anymore." There was a silence so deep I could almost hear her heart break, or perhaps just her pride. Then the line went dead. I stepped onto the balcony, breathing in the lavender, the night air cool against my skin. For the first time I felt no tremor, no fear. Stephanie could rant, threaten, even crawl. But her power ended where my door began. David had made sure of that. And I at last was free. The night after Stephanie's final threat, I slept without dreams. No images of packed suitcases, no echo of slammed doors, no courtroom dramas invented in her mind. Just rest. When dawn broke, light poured across the quilt on my bed, and I realized something remarkable. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. The storm had passed, and I was still standing. The following week, I signed the last of the papers with the bank. The accounts David had built for me were now in my full possession, legal, untouchable mine. With careful budgeting, I could live comfortably for the rest of my life. But more than the money, it was the knowledge that my son had seen me, valued me, and prepared for me. That knowledge weighed more than any check or balance sheet. I used part of the funds to furnish my little apartment, a second-hand dining table where I could invite neighbors for tea, a rocking chair for the balcony where I sat watching sunsets bleed into lavender skies. I planted rosemary and marigolds beside the lavender pots, and soon my balcony smelled like both strength and memory. At the community center, I joined a group that met every Thursday. Women like me, some widows, some divorced, some simply tired of being invisible. We painted, we shared stories, we laughed so hard sometimes we cried. I told them pieces of my journey, how grief and betrayal had pushed me out, but also how preparation and love had carried me forward. They nodded with knowing eyes. Because betrayal wears many faces, but survival always looks the same: resilient, steady, alive. Stephanie faded to the edges of my life. The calls stopped. The letters ceased. I heard through a neighbor that she'd put the house up for sale, too big, too costly to maintain without David. Karma had moved quietly, as it always does, balancing the scales in its own time. And me, I walked taller. Not because I had defeated her, but because I had reclaimed myself. For so long, I had accepted the narrative of being a burden, of being extra. But David's final gift, his records, his letter, his love, reminded me that I was never less. I was always enough. On quiet evenings, I light a candle beside David's photo. I don't weep as much anymore. Instead, I whisper, "Thank you. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for preparing for me. Thank you for teaching me that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building a life no one can take away." And now, dear listener, I want to turn to you, because I know I am not the only one who has lived through hurt at the hands of those closest to us. Many of you carry your own scars from family betrayal stories, times when you gave everything and were treated as if it were nothing, when love was met with greed or when silence was mistaken for weakness. These stories hurt, but they also bind us together, reminding us that betrayal does not have the last word. The last word belongs to how we rise. So I ask you, have you lived through your own story like this? Have you faced the sting of betrayal, yet still found the strength to rebuild? Share it in the comments below. Your words may be the candle someone else needs in their dark night. Because that's what I've learned: family betrayal may break your heart, but it does not have to break your future. With truth, with dignity, with love that remembers, we can step into lives that are ours to claim. Thank you for walking with me through mine. If this story has touched you, please like, share, and subscribe, because there are so many more voices waiting to be heard, so many more stories of resilience and renewal. And who knows, the next one might sound a little like yours.